told her, Dr. Rima's co-host, I have our guest, Janet Phelan, on, and we're trying to get Dr. Rima to join us. And we're seeing if we can do that. Let's find out if she can come and join us. All right, will she answer? We were speaking to her a few moments ago. She is, of course, in the hospital with General Burt. This is now the 36th day they've been at JFK Medical Center. The good news is that Burt, despite everything that the folks at the hospital were saying, appears to be surviving. This is a good thing. He is no longer in the critical care unit. That is a very good thing. He's been moved to a regular hospital area, and indeed, he was actually sitting up a while ago. He wants to get up and walk around, but, well, after a month of being in a bed, that's not easy. And he has overcome, he has survived 2 bouts of pneumonia and kidney failure. His kidneys, by the way, are back and working again. And there was a thrombosis in his left leg, which was there and taken care of along the way. As Dr. Rima says, there is a place for modern standard medicine, and that place is the ER, the ICU, the CCU, and the surgical suite. And there she is. All right, Dr. Rima.
Hello.
We can hear you fine. I was just telling the folks the good news
Great.
about Dr. Rima.
I can hear you. Say something.
Right here. Can you hear me, Dr. Rima?
I thought I could hear you.
I hear you. Not a problem.
There. Perfect.
Okay. I was just telling the folks about General Burt's condition. You can give much greater details. I have Janet Phelan, our guest, on the line as well.
Hi, Janet.
All right. And Dr. Rima, you are live streaming.
I'm live streaming. Well, welcome to the Dr. Rima Reports. I'm really glad to be on the Dr. Rima Truth Reports. It didn't look like I was going to make it. I'm sitting in a hospital waiting room for the intensive care units, the neurological, cardiac, and other intensive care units. And there are lots of people here who are hoping that their loved ones do as well as my loved one, General Burt. General Burt was transferred from the critical care unit yesterday to a telemetry unit, which means a step-down nursing care. It's very crowded. It's very busy. He's in a room with another guy, and that means that there's no privacy at all. But, he's doing well. They sat him up for the maximum time that they can do that for rehab, which is first day, which is an hour, and he tolerated it perfectly. No problems, no blood pressure fall, nothing. He's in good spirits. He can't make a sound because he has a trach, a tube at the base of his throat, but that will be reversed. He's been weaned off the ventilator, so he's breathing on his own, and he's doing that very, very well. And things are coming along beautifully. You might hear a lot of noise. The only way I can cut the noise out is to put myself on mute, which means to become totally silent, which is like General Burt. I'm learning to become a pretty good lip reader. General Burt's antibiotics are being cut down because he doesn't seem to have any infections anywhere. His lungs are slowly clearing, although he has a chest tube draining large amounts of fluid out, and his kidneys appear to be coming back to life. Now, all of this amazing stuff that nobody except Ralph and me and the people who understand the impact of intentionality expected to happen. That leaves out all the doctors. All of this is happening for 2 reasons. One, because of the nutrients that I've been able to give him for the last 2 weeks through his stomach tube, his feeding tube, which nobody else in the hospital and pretty much nobody else in the allopathic medical care system is getting. And people are saying, wow, I can't believe how well he looks. My goodness, this is extraordinary. And nobody thinks to say, what's in that cup of green sludge that you pour into him 4 times a day? They don't seem to be making the connection. Then the other thing is that there's a product that we were, I suppose you could say, blessed to be able to encounter just the evening before General Burt collapsed and was hospitalized. And the characteristics of that amazing product are such that it is literally causing the genetic material, the genes, to reorganize and repair themselves in a way that is truly mind blowing, paradigm shifting. We're so enthused by this that we are holding an investors meeting on the 13th of October in order to raise the money necessary to market this substance in the United States. It's already being used in Malaysia. It's already serving the needs of about 1 million people in Malaysia. It's being marketed in China. It's about to be marketed in India, but it's totally unavailable in the United States, and that's wrong because it's life saving. So, if you or someone that you know wants to become an investor in a paradigm shifting natural substance, totally non toxic, that delivers the information to the genetic material to reverse genetic damage, to reverse genetic change, to reverse genomicide, then I would love you to send an email to Ralph at Ralph.Fusatola, F as in Frank U, C as in Charlie E, T as in Tom, OLA, Fusatola at gmail.com with the subject
That's right. And I'm
investor
going to be putting, I'll be putting
with
that.
the subject investor, and Ralph will send you an invitation. Please, no frivolous inquiries. This is a serious meeting. We're going to change the paradigm of health and medicine in the United States with this very product that literally saved General Bert's life.
Exactly, Dr. Rima. I've seen General Burt a number of times. I've watched him go up and down, and now way up. He he's his spirits are very high, and we're just so very happy that he's going to be with us for a long time to come. Um, I'm very interested as Dr. Rima has talked about this new. It's not really a new. Let's not say new nutrient because it is a I'm sure grandfathered under DeShea, but
Well,
it is new for America.
it is new for America. It actually was described in the Vedas,
Hmm.
and it was used for about 5,000 years in India
And still
before
is.
modern science still is before modern science figured out a way to standardize it and so on. So this is a completely familiar substance to the body presented in a different way, and the impact is literally to reverse genetic damage.
This is, folks, something we've been looking for years. Dr. Rima has been talking about genome disruption syndrome, the damage to our genetic material caused by what General Bird identified as the five genomocidal technologies. You know what they are. They are radioactive technologies, they are geoengineering technologies, they are vaccine drug toxin technologies, they are ag biz technologies, and all the industrial toxins that are assaulting us from every direction. They all result in the same type of damage, and ultimately it's damage to your genetic content. We have been looking for, if you will, a triad of support for normal genetic expression. And we found that, I think, in nanosilver, in CBDs, and in Dr. Rima's metalipsome. You'll be hearing a lot more about that in the next few weeks, but it's a triad of power that is going to make a
Meta-lipos-
difference.
Meta-liposome. It's
Right.
extraordinary. Meta-liposome.
Got it. Well, I'm going to get out of the way and let you introduce the guest, Dr. Rima. This is an extraordinary moment, and I'm
Well,
so happy
Janet
you're with us.
Fallon, thank you. Thank you. Janet Fallon has been on our show before, so we're happy to welcome her back. She's a poet, she's a journalist, she's an observer of human society who fearlessly talks about many of its aspects including the craziness. But today she has something very different to talk to us about. She has a very serious situation going on that she has chosen not to remain silent about. And we've talked a little bit about it before. Janet, welcome back.
Thank you very much, Rima, for having me back on the air. I want to express how relieved I am to hear how well that your husband is doing.
Thank you. Thank you. Me too.
I I can
Thank you.
imagine.
Janet, tell us a little bit about yourself for the listeners who were not fortunate enough to hear you before when you've been on the Dr. Rima Truth Reports. And then perhaps you'd like to launch directly into what you're struggling against because it's monumental and massively important for each of us.
Yeah, well, okay. Well, I've been a journalist over 30 years. I started out sort of on the traditional path, undergraduate, graduate school in journalism, wrote for some regional, local, and national publications, and then around 2002, things changed in my life. We've talked about that, I think, before on your show. Um, you know, what happened surrounding the murder and the cover-up of the murder of my mother. So that situation was really life-changing for me, not only internally, in terms of my own perception and understanding of what the world was about, what our society in the U.S. was about, what our legal system is about, but it also changed external circumstances for me rather radically. And I ended up fleeing the U.S. in 2008. In 2014, my book Exile was published. I was living at that time in Chiapas, Mexico. And following the publication of my book, my situation in Mexico went seriously south. I the things that caused me to flee the U.S., um, the aggression by police and other law enforcement officials began to manifest very seriously for me in Chiapas. So the book was published in 2014. About 6 months ago, I had a communication with my then editor, Alex Kalmakoff, at New Eastern Outlook, and I expressed to him my intention of going back to Geneva this November for the 8th review conference of the Biological Weapons Convention. I had participated and presented at the BWC in Geneva, Switzerland in 2011, and this is the next review conference. They happen every 5 years. And at that point, the struggles I was having in Chiapas became monumental and unsurvivable. And I'm only going to give a couple of details here. I'm sure anyone's imagination can fill in the blanks. I was renting a place in the mountains, and I would have to go into town occasionally, pick up food or whatever. And it began that every time I left my home was being entered without my permission or my knowledge, and very dangerous things were happening uh, that could have ended up being absolutely that were intended to be life threatening. Um, and I would discover these things on my return. I was no longer able to keep unopened containers or liquid in the refrigerator, for example. And it actually got worse than that. So in May of this year, I closed up the cabin and I left for Uruguay. And I was 3 months in Uruguay, during which time I filed a petition and request for precautionary measures with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, which basically governs human rights in the OAS affiliated countries. and my petition uh, basically named Mexico as violating my rights and well, violating my rights and also violating the OAS human rights treaties in a number of different ways. And proof was provided to the commission. So this was filed with the commission on July 18th. And at that point, I thought that possibly it would be safe for me to return to my home in Mexico. So at the end of August, I flew into Mexico City, which is actually where I am now, and discovered almost immediately that nothing had changed whatsoever concerning the protocols that I had found myself under. So I have been in Mexico City. I've not gone home to Chiapas yet. I've been here in Mexico City for a month, and I have been attempting to garner some support in the human rights agencies and organizations that exist here in Mexico City to protect the rights of anyone in Mexico, protect the rights of journalists in specific. And I unfortunately have to report that my efforts have failed dismally. It does appear that nobody wants to really touch the situation. And where there might be initial interest, very quickly the decision appears to be made in these organizations that this is not something we're going to be able to address. Actually, an individual who works for one of the press protection agencies told me, since the U.S. is the motivating uh, force in terms of your persecution, it's going to be very difficult for anyone to do anything because we just can't stop these people. They just run roughshod over the Mexican government. They run roughshod over anybody they want to. So at this point in time, I have made the decision to go ahead and return to Chiapas next week, knowing full well that what I may be facing there it may be extremely challenging. My intention remains firm to travel to Geneva in the beginning of November. I sit on the board of a human rights agency named Ithaca, and I will, under the sponsorship of Ithaca, I have the ability to present and participate at the international convention known as the Biological Weapons Convention. And I want to explain for a minute why this is so important. My research and publication, because I'm certainly not keeping any of this to myself, has indicated that we are entering a time where there may be intention by the United States of America to deploy a selectively delivered or engineered pandemic that would only affect the targets. Now, this sounds like science fiction. I would encourage anyone listening here to research genetic weapons, research selective delivery systems, and you'll see that this is not science fiction, that the technology not only exists, but it exists and is up and running within the United States of America. There are numerous parameters under which the United States has violated the Biological Weapons Convention. And I intend to travel to Geneva and present this evidence to the convention at large. And it was upon my communications with Alex Kalmakoff at New Eastern Outlook, who I was writing for at the time, that, stating my intention to do this, it was at that point that all friggin' heck broke loose in my life. So,
well, this immediately upon hearing someone say, I am being poisoned, I am being persecuted, for instance, in this case by the United States, no one will help me. The presumption tends to be, this person is delusional. So, and I know you're not delusional. I'm not in any way suggesting that, Janet. But that is the immediate presumption.
Of course it is.
As
Yeah. In
you,
fact,
as
poisoning is classic. It's classic paranoid schizophrenia, of course.
exactly. So as you moved into an understanding of what was happening, and you tried to tell people what was happening, I assume you were met with ridicule and disbelief and people avoiding you.
Well, the fact is, Rima, I've largely kept quiet about it. I have had problems now with persecution by the US government going on for a decade. And my book, Exiled, documents this with external documentation. This is not my say so. You will see police records, you will see court records, basically with attempts to violate the law and deprive me of my rights at every single juncture. So that part is certainly on the record. Now, this poisoning stuff, it's real tricky because people who say they're being poisoned are very often crazy. So I made a
Exactly.
decision. I made a decision very early on that I was going to take every step I could to protect my life and protect myself. And I was going to keep quiet about this because it didn't seem to me that it was going to be very productive to get to start you know going on the air, writing things, screaming about what was happening. So at this point in time, what I have provided the commission is fairly weighty in terms of proof, and some of the proof is my medical records and showing certain types of organ issues which directly tie into the sorts of attacks that I say that I have been inflicted with. So the issue here, and here I am now. I'm in Mexico City. I now have some pretty interesting documentation again going on from these so-called human rights agencies, uh, and I'm not going to them and saying, "Help me, I'm being poisoned." I'm saying that my rights have been violated by certain officials in the Mexican government. Here is the proof, the external documentation that my rights are being violated. Um, I have also endured unauthorized intrusions into my home, which have resulted in severe illness, which is also documented. So all I'm saying here is that what I wrote to the commission was I, in my request for precautionary measures, is I need someone to guard my house when I'm gone. That's a very simple request, and in fact, the commission has been known on other occasions to provide accompaniment for journalists who feel that they're being threatened when they go out in public. I don't feel threatened when I go out in public. I feel concerned about the repeated unauthorized invasions into my home.
So, what did you do in brief? What did you do in brief to earn the special attention of the systems that are attending to you so dangerously?
As I mentioned, there were two incidents that really ramped up the issues that I have endured here in Mexico. One was the publication of my book in 2014, and what I'm documenting in the book is specifically the cover up of the murder of my mother. Now, that's kind of the substance of the book. It goes into some other areas. It goes into some of my research on biological weapons and some of my concerns about other eugenics programs in the U.S. But essentially, what I tried to do in the book was to document what had happened to my mother. And that was done again through external documentation. So you have one person who had actually been a government employee. My mother had been a supervisor at a health department in Southern California for most of her career. One person who was retired, who was murdered, and that is the focal point of the book, although I do go into some concerns about, some attempts to deal with the question, why did this happen? Okay, and then the second issue that resulted in this, shall we say, enhanced attention I got in Mexico was my communications with my editor concerning the Biological Weapons Convention and my effort, my intention to travel to Geneva in uh, in November and present the incontrovertible proof to the convention that the U.S. is violating this treaty and doing so with what appears to be intent. Now, interestingly enough, and I don't know if you got this email or if I'd copied you on this or not, Dr. Lebo, but essentially I had gone ahead and made my request to register at the BWC. This was done in the last couple of days, and I had just received a response from the BWC, actually came in this morning, in which they're requesting actually, they're not honoring my request for registration. According to the BWC's own guidelines, if you have participated in a biological weapons convention previously, all you have to do is send in a letter with the name of your NGO and your position in the NGO, and that's it. And so that's what I did. And the BWC is now declining to process my registration and is requesting enhanced and further information concerning the NGO, which is called Ithaca. So I responded to the request. I'm waiting until tomorrow to see what sort of what sort of response I get from the BWC. Now, back in 2011, I had, as I mentioned, I had participated in the BWC. It's a 3-week long convention. I had participated, and at that time, I had registered under Ithaca, the NGO, and had almost immediately had a challenge to my registration, which had already gone through at that point in time. And a gentleman named Dr. Graham Pearson, who was at that point the coordinator of the NGOs for the BWC, issued a challenge and said, I see that you're a journalist. We're not going to let you register as an NGO, and you can register as a journalist. Now, the reason that one would want to register as an NGO is that NGOs can participate. They can present to the convention. Journalists essentially are sitting there with duct tape over their mouth. They can't present, they can't engage the delegates, they can sit in the peanut gallery and take notes. So at that point, I was able to successfully, shall we say, challenge Dr. Pearson's challenge to my engagement and participation with the convention. Now, what's interesting to me, I looked into Graham Pearson, like, who is this guy? Well, as it turns out, he's not only the coordinator for the NGOs, he is also a professor of peace studies at a university in England. But prior to being a professor of peace studies, he was director of Port and Down. Port and Down is the biological and chemical weapons program for Great Britain. So he reinvented himself. He went from being a director of killing programs to being a professor of peace studies. And we see that kind of, shall we say, uh, strange self reinvention going on a lot of times.
Magical transformation.
Yeah, magical transformations, exactly. So, yeah. whatever that was all about, but he wasn't successful. But now the BWC itself is requesting information, which I'm just going to read here. This is what their website says. NGOs and academic institutions may register to attend public sessions of the review conference. A letter or note verbal on the official letterhead of the organization should be addressed to the ISU applying for attendance of the public sessions of the conference and listing the full names and titles of the representatives who will attend, which is what I did. Then it says NGOs and academic institutions that have not previously attended a BWC meeting should indicate previous interactions between the organization and the United Nations in relation to disarmament and non-proliferation issues. A mission statement or summary of work of the organization should be provided. So I am being requested to provide information that would apply to those who have never attended a BWC meeting, and I'm actually being asked for more than that. So it's, I'm just simply waiting to see how my response to the BWC will be handled and what sort of action they're going to take on my registration.
Why would you return to Chiapas if you feel that your life is in danger there, Janet?
I'm sorry, what?
Why would you return to Chiapas if you feel that your life is in danger there?
Why would I return where?
To Chiapas.
Well, I don't have any choice. I don't really have any choice. I mean, I'm paying my rent in Chiapas. I'm actually paying double my rent to board my animals while I'm away. I'm paying 3 times my rent to stay in Mexico City, and I've exhausted, I've exhausted the nest egg. So I don't really have any other choice.
Wow. So, do you expect to be the assaults to continue in Chiapas? Clearly, you do.
I would be surprised if they didn't. They're happening now in Mexico City. So, I expect things to be difficult in Chiapas. They're difficult now in Mexico City.
What happened in Uruguay?
Uruguay, we set up a fairly airtight situation for me. I became aware rather quickly that there were intrusions happening when I went out, so I just stopped going out. And the individual who was kind of accommodating me in Uruguay, she did my shopping for me. And I stayed in the apartment and worked. And nobody could come in. And that was it. They took care of business.
So, the information that you have about what the United States is planning, have you made that public, or what the United States is engaged in? Have you made that public?
It's been made public in a number of articles. I have an article that was published concerning the 7th Review Conference. It was published in Activist Post back in 2011. It's called Dancing the Apocalypso with the Microbial Gestapo.
I remember that article. It was quite brilliant.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I've also been tracking further evidence of the U.S. Involvement in activities which can easily be construed as violating the BWC. For example, it was just about a year ago that the Dugway Proving Grounds, which is a Army site, was found sending active anthrax through FedEx to over 90 labs worldwide. That's a violation of the BWC. Now, it also raises further questions. Why was the U.S. sending active anthrax through the mail, which, of course, if there was some sort of leak or something, could have gotten a lot of people sick or dead? Why were they doing this? What is the research that is going on with active anthrax in labs in Canada, in South Korea, in Australia, in Great Britain, in Japan, as well as multiple labs in the United States. These questions haven't been answered. The U.S., when they were caught sending the active anthrax through the mail, there was a lot of media attention to this. I mean, all the large mainstream media outlets cover this. And basically, the Pentagon said, "Oh well, we're going to figure out what happened. This should never have happened." And they decided that the deactivating equipment at Dugway was faulty, and they declared it had been fixed. Well, actually, this had happened about 8 years before. The same thing. The U.S. was caught sending active anthrax from Dugway through the mail. People have very short memory spans, it seems. But at the same time, nobody was asking the question, why are you doing this? What kind of research is going on? Because the BWC allows a certain amount of toxins to be maintained in order to do countermeasure research. Well, countermeasures, of course, they want to find vaccines, they want to find, treatment, and so forth. The fact is that here it is, 14 years, 15 years after the anthrax attacks that took place in September of 2001, and we still don't have a second generation anthrax vaccine. So, what is all this research about? I went ahead and contacted some of the labs. It was very difficult to find out what these labs, which labs these were, where they, they would name the countries, but they wouldn't tell you which labs. It was all top secret. And I was able to contact a couple of labs, and man, they shut down so fast they wouldn't talk to you. So we don't really understand what all this anthrax research is about. But whatever it's about, the U.S. violated the convention by sending this live anthrax all over the world. Were there any repercussions? No.
Is anthrax the organism upon which your research is focused?
I'm sorry, what's that? I didn't hear you.
Is anthrax the organism upon which your research has focused, or is that just an example?
No. My research has focused on delivery systems and on legal machinations. The delivery system work was done primarily in an article entitled "Water as a Weapon." Subsequent research has indicated that the U.S. has changed we've changed our domestic legislation governing biological weapons. And the first change took place right after 9/11 in the USA Patriot Act, and that would be Section 817, which has a caveat. Section 817 is the expansion of the biological weapons statute, and it has a caveat which states that the prohibitions contained in this section shall not apply to any duly authorized United States governmental activity. Now, this is an addition. This is a change to our prior biological weapons legislation. And what this says essentially is that the U.S. has given itself immunity for violating its own biological weapons laws. Now, not only did the U.S. Insert this rather dramatic and shocking change into the USA Patriot Act, but the U.S. violated the international convention known as the BWC by failing to report this change to the convention at large. Under the BWC, there's something called politically binding mandates. If you have any changes in status having to do with biological weapons in your country, including changes in legislation, you are mandated to report this to the convention at large. The U.S. did not report this to the convention at large. And not only that, the U.S. lied to the convention about the status of our current biological weapons legislation. While I was at the BWC in 2011, there were side events that a couple of which were were sponsored by the United States, and the side events uh, basically took place during the lunch hour, and people could come or not, and usually people did come. And during one of these side events, there was a presentation by a official from the Department of Homeland Security named Dr. Daniel Gerstein, and his presentation was basically to explain what our United States' biological weapons legislation was, and how this is a model that other countries should follow, and so forth. And he did a PowerPoint demonstration, and he put the legislation up on the screen. Except it was the legislation prior to Section 817. It was the legislation that Section 817 amended, and amended, in a couple of different ways, including giving the U.S. government immunity from violating its own biological weapons laws. So, so
Oh,
this,
yes.
yeah.
Janet, in that context, we're seeing right now another example of that going on where the CDC has proposed what it claims is merely just a reorganization of existing regulations for quarantine, treatment, and vaccination during declared national health emergencies. Only this new document actually is a direct assault on the universal right to informed consent. It actually says in there, without regard to the consent of the individuals involved. And so we're watching again the U.S. government attempting to exempt itself from its own laws. Wars have consequences. And one of the great consequences of World War II was that the international law of informed consent was codified. It was codified in the Nuremberg Code, which was written by American prosecutors and jurists to restate the existing law of informed consent, and then it was used to try a bunch of Nazi doctors and hang some of them for violating the right of informed consent, pursuant to the Geneva Conventions. When a major power, any power, puts foreign nationals on trial for war crimes, they must use law that applies to their own people as well. And so the U.S. government is bound by international treaty to observe informed consent. But we see in that example, just like the example you're giving, that the U.S. government is not doing that. It's attempting to get around the law that it ought to obey.
Well, I'd like you to clarify something for me, because it was my understanding, and maybe I'm wrong here, but it's my understanding that the Nuremberg Code only ever remained a suggestion, that it was never passed into law. And
Well, not
because of that,
exactly. You have to go
okay,
back to the
explain
beginning.
it to me then.
Yeah, let's go back to, without going back to the Hippocratic Oath and the 1,000 years of actual history of the concept of informed consent. Let's start in 1914 when Judge, later Justice Cardoza, found in a New York State case, in a famous case, that a doctor that engaged in a medical intervention without informed consent committed an assault and battery, a trespass, malpractice, and was liable in damages. Not for the harm they did necessarily, or they might be up the malpractice, but just for the act itself of intervening without consent. So let's get that as the law 100 years ago. Just 2 years ago, in Missouri versus McNeely, excuse me, Supreme Court was dealing with a case in which an individual refused to consent to blood being withdrawn at the demand of a police officer who did not bother to get a warrant. The case, it's an interesting case. McNeely was involved in a one-car accident, apparently. He was rushed to an emergency room, strapped to a gurney, orderly on one side, cop on the other. And as they're rolling into the ER, the cop is saying, make sure you get his blood. I want to know what his blood alcohol is. And McNeely is saying, I imagine, in a slurred voice, don't do it. I don't consent. Don't take my blood. I do not consent. Well, they took his blood. They arrested him for drunk driving. He's convicted. And somehow the case not only gets to the U.S. Supreme Court, But it gets to the U.S. Supreme Court with a fact pattern that says he refused to consent. Supreme Court said, the cop had 15 minutes during which he could have gotten a telephone warrant and it could have taken the blood legally. But without consent and without a due process hearing about that specific person, no. As they said in that decision, we have never wavered from our commitment to the idea that you have what they call privacy interest, what I would call a right to prevent a government agent from piercing the skin. Now, go forward, go backwards a half a century to Nuremberg. As I said, the Nuremberg Code was written by American legal scholars under the oversight of the Nuremberg prosecutor, the American prosecutor who was a United States Supreme Court justice on leave for that purpose, and they intended it as a restatement of the existing law.
Well, I think we might have uh, some differences in perception here. I just did a quick Google search here. This The Nuremberg Code is a set of research ethics principles for human experimentation set as a result of the subsequent Nuremberg trials at the end of the Second World War. So it seems to me that there may be some gray zone here as to whether this is law or principles. I'm thinking right now about the Edgewood test vets case, which has been ongoing now in court for a number of years. Um, there are a number of individuals who had been members of the military who had agreed to uh, volunteer for like testing gas masks and a couple of sort of things that didn't seem too very dangerous. And in fact, the military lied to them about what the research projects were about, and some of these individuals were very badly hurt.
Yep.
And the Edgewood test vets case, is well, it seems
Also,
not.
Janet, there's also the vaccine A case.
Yeah,
And
but wait a
yeah,
second. 1 second, please. This Edgewood test case is not really asserting uh, this issue of informed consent. As it has turned out, all that the lawyers are trying to do is to get the Army to share information with the test subjects that may help them in dealing with the longstanding effects um, of being lied to and had chemical and biological weapons tested on them.
yeah,
So
no question. And
this is
Janet,
not.
in the vaccine A case, the same thing happened. After 2 years, a federal judge was finally forced by higher authority to vacate the injunction, and a lot of people got that vaccine against their will, and a lot of them got sick. I agree. By the way, going back to the Nuremberg Code, the actual language in the code, the coercion language, has been taken up almost verbatim and used in the United States Institutional Review Board statute and used in the International Bioethics Convention that the United States is a signatory to. So I understand what you're saying. The courts have basically carved out an exception to informed consent in the case of people in the military, which I consider unacceptable. I consider it aiding and abetting crimes against humanity, and I do not believe that usurpations of right are ever precedent and should be overturned as rapidly as possible. But yeah, I understand where you're coming from on that.
Yeah, I'm just really not convinced here that these were. I mean, I'd like to see that the proof that this has been passed into law, because
Well, it's not a
I
matter
see
of being
this.
passed into law. It is
Okay.
customary. It is customary international law. That's the phrase. If you go to drrematruthreports.com and look up informed consent brief, you'll see my brief in which I quote some scholarly journals on that specific question on when does it become customary international law. The Geneva Conventions say that if you try a foreign combatant, foreign military person for war crimes, that law must also apply to your country. So by operation of the Geneva Conventions, the Nuremberg Code applies to the United States. And maybe the American courts are not ready to accept that, but there are higher authorities. The Nazi doctors never expected to be held accountable for what they did. The Soviet psychiatrists never expected to be held up to worldwide approbation for what they did. But it happens. And I have a suspicion that maybe even while we're all still alive, those who have foisted the vaccine madness on us, and that's really the core of this that we're talking about when we're talking about informed consent, those individuals will face justice, and they will face it sooner rather than later because it's breaking. The whole control system is breaking. And people like you, Janet, are among the people who are helping it break. Dr. Rima, we're almost an hour into the program. If you guys want to take a little break for a few moments, let me talk about some of the bookkeeping stuff that we need to do. I'm happy to do that. We can do it in a little while. Want to tell?
Absolutely. Please go ahead. I want people to understand that, as with many of our guests, Janet Fallon, author of Exile, and Janet's going to give you her website in a moment. Janet Fallon is a heroic trailbreaker. Trailblazer, breaking new ground, because she's saying what other people have found and dare not say, or have been killed for saying. And Janet is saying it publicly and saying it into the maw of the monster, if you will. And I really salute you for that, Janet.
Well, thank you, Rima.
So, Ralph, you were going to give us your
Yes.
website, Janet.
Well, janetphelan.com is no more. It has been hacked. And if you would like to find my recent articles, you can go to activistpost.com and put my name into the search engine. You can go to New Eastern Outlook and search there also for my recent articles. But at this point, I no longer have a website to,
Wow.
yeah.
Wow. We know that feeling. We get hacked on a regular and frustrating basis. So we understand how awful that is. But Activist Post is a wonderful site. I have published some things there too. I love what they're willing to do, and I love their open honesty. So Activist Post, Janet Fallon. Ralph, will you do the bookkeeping things
Most
you wanted to
certainly.
talk about?
Sure. First of all, folks, of course, those of you who are watching this on the live stream or watching the archive will see that we have a screen up and we have our guest's name there, and we have the link to the bookpatch.com and to the Activist Post link as well, so you can follow up with our guest. And this has been fascinating stuff so far, and we have another hour coming forward. Where do we want to start? Well, as you know, folks, Dr. Rima is here in the United States. She's working diligently in the hospital with General Burt, and he is making a recovery which is astounding people. Not astounding me, because I know what to expect from Dr. Rima's work. I want you to remember to go to drrimatruthreports.com. Make sure that you are on our email list. If you are not getting several emails a week from us, you've been bounced off the list by Google or by Gmail or by Yahoo or somebody, and you need to re-up. If you do that, we'll be very happy, and you'll get some very important information. That's number one. Make sure you're on the list. Number two, we're getting closer to a big event. In mid-December, 19th through 23rd, actually, Dr. Rima will be in India overseeing a 25-hour, 5-day long summit. The summit is about genomicide and about solving the problem of genomicide. And you can see on the screen a link, www.endgenomicidecongress.com. That's because this event is part of the 40th anniversary Congress of the All India Social Sciences Organization, which in India is a big major organization. And it's a great honor to have been chosen to convene the intellectual portion of the event. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. That website's a good place to go to find out what's happening. This will be a live streamed event, which means some of our presenters will be from all over the world, and our participants will be as well. So we hope you keep that in mind and keep the 19th through the 23rd of December a little free so you can pick up those specific speakers that you want to hear. It'll all be archived, of course. The other thing, of course, we want to bring to your attention is the CDC's actions we were talking about a little earlier. We have an action item for you so you can send a clear message to decision makers that they must not only stop this CDC power grab, this medical tyranny, but also adopt a law, which we have called the FIRM Act, which is Freedom of Informed Medical Refusal, FIRM. And it's a law that would simply allow people to sue if their informed consent rights are violated. Make sure you have a federal cause of action for your informed consent rights. It would be, I think, a very big step forward to make it clear that the public policy of the United States is to respect informed consent. And that's where we are at the moment. Of course, we always welcome your donations. Go to drrematruthreports.com and go to the donation button. And there we go. So that's where we are, folks. We are beginning the second hour. Dr. Rima, take over.
Now, I have, and your donations are most needed, folks. We have big work to do, and none of us receives a salary. Both General Burt and I um, essentially live on our pensions and donate anything that's left over to the foundation. Um, Ralph is uh, committed in the same way that we are, and we are asking for your donations to do the good things that we do and to keep the lights on and pay the ordinary customary costs. This is really important. Or instead of donating, you can go to nsfmarketplace.com and find products that put your health in your hands in an utterly extraordinary way. Now, I want to share something that just came in today because maybe, Janet, this is of some interest to you. And maybe, Ralph, this is of some um, not only insight, but stimulation for options of things that we can do. I'm having a thought. Perhaps this information, Janet, might save a life. For instance, yours. The background story is this. I got a call today from a guy who left a message saying, I was knocked off your mailing list. I like getting your newsletters, I think they're important. But I was knocked off your mailing list somehow. And when I signed up again, the message was marked spam. And I just think you ought to know about this. Well, that's the kind of shenanigans that the people who can do that are doing. And it's not too surprising at all. And then he said, do you know about the article that Chief Justice Antonin Scalia wrote? Obviously, he wrote it before he died, or perhaps was murdered in a remote hunting um, lodge in Texas. But I said, no, I don't. And he said, Antonin Scalia wrote an article, and I'm going to read excerpts from it, that and this just happened today, by the way. Antonin Scalia wrote an article that makes it clear that the grand jury is part of the Constitution. It is, in fact, the fourth branch set up by the Constitution, and that it does not require a court or an official of the court to convene, and that the people can convene the grand jury and then take the indictment to the officials who are bound to attend to the indictment brought back by the grand jury. Let me read you some of this information. Antonin Scalia, on December 8th, 2013, stated that the grand jury belongs to the people, and we have the article available for people. Um, In a stunning 6-3 decision in 1992, Justice Scalia wrote for the majority and said, in the Supreme Court case of the United States versus Williams, 112 SCT 1735 504 US 36 118 L.ed.2nd 352 1992, Justice Antonin Scalia confirmed that the American grand jury is neither part of the judicial, executive, nor legislative branches of government, but instead belongs to the people. It is, in effect, a fourth branch of government, governed, quote, quote, and administered to directly by and on behalf of the American people. And, said Antonin Scalia, its authority emanates from the Bill of Rights. The acts of the grand jury is the consent of the people. The grand jury is mentioned in the Bill of Rights, but not in the body of the Constitution. It has not been textually assigned, therefore, to any of the branches described in the first three articles. It is, quote, a it is a constitutional fixture in its own right, said Justice Scalia. In fact, the whole theory of its function is that it belongs to no branch of the institutional government, serving as a kind of buffer or referee between the government and the people. Thus, citizens have the unbridled right to, and this is where I'm thinking of you, Janet. Thus, citizens have the unbridled right to impanel their own grand juries and present true bills of indictment to a court, which is then required to commence a criminal proceeding. Our founding fathers persistently thereby created a buffer that people may rely upon for justice when public officials, including judges, criminally violate the law. That is a quote from Justice Antonin Scalia, who goes on to say, quote, the grand jury is an institution separate from the courts, over whose functioning the courts do not preside. We think it is clear that, as a general matter at least, no such supervisory judicial authority exists. And then he goes on to say the common law of the Fifth Amendment demands a traditional functioning grand jury. Although the grand jury normally operates, of course, in the courthouse and under judicial auspices, its institutional relationship with the judicial branch has traditionally been, so to speak, at arm's length. Judges' direct involvement in the functioning of the grand jury has generally been confined to the constitutive one of calling the grand jurors together and administering their oaths of office. The grand jury's functional independence from the judicial branch is evident both in the scope of its power to investigate criminal wrongdoing and in the manner in which that power is exercised. We continue with a quote from Justice Scalia. What I just read is his quote, and I'll go on. The grand jury can investigate merely on suspicion that the law is being violated, or even because it wants assurance that it is not being violated. It need not identify the offender it suspects or even the precise nature of the offense it is investigating. The grand jury requires no authorization from its constituting court to initiate an investigation, nor does the prosecutor require leave of court to seek a grand jury indictment. And it's in its day-to-day functioning, the grand jury generally operates without the interference of a presiding judge. It swears in its own witnesses and deliberates in total secrecy. Justice Antonin Scalia went on to say, recognizing this tradition of independence, we have said the Fifth Amendment constitutional guarantee presupposes an investigative party acting independently of either prosecuting attorney or judge. Given the grand jury's operational separateness from its constituting court, it should come as no surprise that we have been reluctant to invoke the judicial supervisory power as a basis for prescribing modes of grand jury proceeding. Over the years, we have received many requests to exercise supervision over the grand jury's evidence-taking process, but We have refused them all. It would run counter to the whole history of the grand jury institution to permit an indictment to be challenged, quote, on the grounds that there was an incomplete or inadequate evidence before the grand jury, end quote. Now, I would like your comment, Ralph, as an attorney, and I would like your comment, Janet, as someone who is threatened and imperiled, as to whether this offers some options that begin to be interesting in your thinking.
I have three questions about it. First, number one, when was this stated? Number two, was it a majority or minority opinion? Or number three, was it something in a speech?
1992, majority opinion.
All right, that's very good. It's a very powerful statement, and it shows an understanding of the law, because truly the grand jury is or ought to be independent of prosecutor and court. Of course, by and large, it's not, as you know, and the juries and the petite juries especially are very rigidly controlled to get the show trial results that are desired very often. But this is very positive statement about the common law grand jury and what its role is, and it certainly is the way the grand juries were back, 100 years, 150, 200 years ago. Maybe not so much now, though. Janet.
Yes, I'm aware of a number of groups across the U.S. who are attempting to set up these common law grand juries. I've been in touch with a number of groups who are attempting to do this in different parts of the country. I'm not aware of any of them having any success in having any of their rendered decisions being taken seriously by the courts of law, prosecutors, that the system of justice that we have. I think that they are largely being treated as if they're sort of silly little people getting together doing silly things, which the system just isn't going to pay much attention to. It's a real shame. I know that, well, for example, in California, there the only criminal grand jury that can be convened must be convened by the district attorney. Therefore, if citizens are concerned, well, if they're concerned that members of the legal system attached with the state or the county, such as judges or prosecuting attorneys, if they're concerned that they're breaking the law, they have to go through the prosecuting attorney's office in order to request a grand jury. I'm not aware of these grand juries actually, that are being set up by the district attorneys actually prosecuting their own. Just doesn't, it seems not to be in their best interest.
Indeed, it seems not to be in their best interest, but I'm wondering whether people could convene their own grand juries and then, of course, going very public with those indictments to the extent that they can be made public, then going public and demanding action. And I think you could create a series of unmet demands that would outrage people. What do you think, Ralph?
Most likely so. Whenever a little bit of public participation is allowed in the system begins to crack. The more stratified, the more controlling a political system becomes, the more fragile it becomes. We only have the great example of the collapse of the Soviet Union to remind us 25 years ago. And so, if the people that run the American system, that run the American Gulag, which is the largest prison system on the planet right now, if they are faced with alternatives to their system, as it were, then I don't know what will happen. This is going to be a very interesting election because all of those issues are up in the air right now, and we'll see from there. I'm suspecting we're going to be on a very interesting ride over the next couple of years.
Would you care to elaborate what you think that ride will look like, feel like, and include?
It depends in many ways on the outcome of the election. Of course, in a pseudo democracy, elections sometimes do make a difference. And while we can't be sure who is going to be manipulating what in order to get what result, I can say that if we end up with a president of one party and a Congress of the other party, that would be good. I'm all in favor of gridlock. If we see that the third party candidates, the Green and the Libertarian Party candidates, together get 10, 15% of the vote, I think that will be a big break in American politics because in the past, third party candidates who've gotten any large number of votes have not been part of a political movement. They've been one shot affairs, like Ross Perot, for example. And they didn't really be. And these two candidates, Jill Stein and Gary Johnson, are both candidates of political parties that have been around for decades and are trying to become big players. The Gallup poll for the past half century has polled on the issue of who does the two-party system work, or should there be a third major party? For half a century, up until 2007, always a majority of the Americans polled remembered their high school civics class brainwashing and said, "Oh no, we support the two-party system," whatever that means. In 2007, the lines crossed, and they have never crossed back again since. And it's nearly a decade in which the public opinion, now 62% in the last poll, believe that there ought to be a third major party. So I think that this election may very well be the last election in which the lid can be kept on, in which the two-party system, which has been in existence since really, since the Civil War, is about to find itself under major attack. Um, I think that if the third parties get a significant number of votes, in some states that will put them on the ballot without having to gather lots of citizen signatures for the next 4 years, and that'll be good. And I also think that it'll put a lot of pressure. There is a scenario in which Gary Johnson takes either his home state of New Mexico or New Mexico and Utah. He's now polling 24% in Utah, and that, by the way, in a three-way race, you can win with the third. And in New Mexico, the same thing is happening. If he wins either of those states, it is likely that neither Trump nor Clinton will have the 270 electoral college votes they need in order to become president. Uh, Now, that doesn't mean that there's a second round of voting by the citizens. What it means is that the article in the Constitution that covers what happens when nobody gets a majority in the Electoral College comes into effect. Now, remember the.
And will they
Go ahead.
and will they put black smoke through the chimney or white smoke through the chimney when one of them is elected?
They may be confused actually. What happens is under those circumstances, first of all, originally the Constitution includes a number of major compromises that allowed the various states to come together under one government. One of those compromises was the nature of the U.S. Senate and how each state would have an equal vote. And another was the Electoral College, which intentionally gives greater weight to the lower population states. And so this is not a pure democracy. This society is a republic, a federal republic, in which there are checks and balances. So let's look at what happens if nobody gets 270 electoral votes. What happens is the choice of president devolves down to Congress. The United States Senate gets to choose the vice president from the two top electoral college vote getters. So they would probably have to choose between the Republican or the Democrat. Meanwhile, the U.S. House gets to choose among the top three electoral college vote getters. And in that vote, each state gets one vote determined by a majority of the delegates, the congressmen from that state, congress ladies from that state. Right now, the Republicans control a majority of the state delegations. But there's a lot of dislike in Congress. The Republican, so-called Republican nominee, actually the individual who engaged in a hostile takeover of the Republican Party and did so successfully. Why? Because a lot of people had walked out of the Republican Party over the past 4 years, a lot of libertarians especially. And the Republican Party was sort of a rump party to begin with. That's what happened to the Whigs before they collapsed. I think we're seeing the same scenario working its way through. And I believe that depending on how this election turns out, that could be accelerated, especially if the U.S. House chooses a president and a coalition of Democrat states and Republican states get together and decide that they could work better with Gary Johnson than they could ever work with either Hillary or Donald. So we shall see. As I said, it could be an interesting year.
Well, that is a most fascinating analysis. Anything that presupposes a win by Gary Johnson under any circumstances is most fascinating. Uh, uh, Fantasy ridden, but fascinating. Um, the question that I was raising was whether if citizens do convene grand juries, they can make them weighty and significant organizations.
Well, unless it's an official grand jury under the state statute, um, it doesn't get to actually issue an indictment that gets brought to court. What those citizen grand juries, and there's a great history of them. Remember during the Vietnam War, there were a number of such events that were organized where people were in effect held up to public
Yeah, but
scorn.
those are not grand juries. Those were trials, mock
Tribunals,
trials,
tribunals,
tribunals.
private
Yes, they were
tribunals. Yeah,
tribunals with no legal sanction
yeah.
authority and
I
with
don't
no
I don't
legal.
read I don't read Scalia's decision as saying that you can simply create a grand jury in a vacuum. I mean, he was talking
Uh,
about what the traditional law was, and he was not saying that you can convene a grand jury in violation of a statute in a state that sets up the way in which a grand jury is convened.
well,
And
damn.
that's why I'm little. I'm not sure. I'm going to read that decision. I'm going to read it
I'm
carefully because
gonna
it's a
I'm
lot.
gonna send it to you.
Please, yeah, because there's a lot of meat there, and I do know, Janet, that there are people out there who are convening citizens' grand juries. I haven't heard any of them get to the point where there is a trial before an Article 3 judge, for example. So that's I think interesting issues. This being the political season, we will no doubt be talking about politics in the Dr. Rima Truth Reports over the next few weeks. Uh,
I think we're
uh,
always talking about
Always,
politics, Ralph.
yeah,
We can
true,
talk about it as health. We can talk about it as money. We
right.
can talk about it as pollution policy. But we're always talking. We can talk about it as GMOs. But it is all politics.
And remember, folks, that's a good reminder, Dr. Rima. Um, a word to the wise. We are hearing more and more reports coming back that a monetary crisis is brewing. It has to do with some German banks and whether they will get bailed out or not. And the German government says no. Maybe the European Central Bank will say yes, and one way or the other, it's October has hardly begun, and there was plenty of room for a number of October surprises. That's for sure. Right. So, Janet, uh, we've been talking about a number of important topics, and certainly the topic that you bring to us, which is the most powerful, is the topic about the conventions that apply to the behavior of the U.S. government and whether or
I
not
have to
any
ask you to
major
talk a
power.
little louder,
Oh,
please, Ralph.
yeah,
I'm really
I'm
having a hard time
a lot
hearing
of
you.
noise in the
Thank you.
background. Dr. Rima, could you put yourself on mute? Yeah, that'll work. All right.
Done.
Done. Dr. Rima is, of course, in the hospital. The photo you see is actually a photo of her in the waiting room in the hospital. So that's probably where she is right now. Janet, what I was saying was You've been talking about the biological war convention essentially, and that can be seen really as part of the whole group of, uh, of Geneva conventions and all the other conventions that are an attempt by the world to rein in the governments of the world. Of course, the real question is, will any of the great powers, and there are some great powers still wandering around this planet, unfortunately. Will any of the great powers really allow themselves to be reined in? Will Russia restrain from bombing civilians in Syria? Will the United States drones refrain from killing people at weddings? What will happen? How will these government actors be brought to heel for the survival of the human race?
Well, these are very weighty questions. And what we're seeing, unfortunately, I think, is playing out a particular part of human psychology, which is very unfortunate, which is that when people assume power over other people, they tend not to act in such benevolent ways. I think the Milgram experiments, the obedience to authority experiments that were done by Stanley Milgram and others, social psychologists, indicate that when you have a power imbalance in a relationship and one person is telling other people what to do, that uh, what ends up happening is that people surrender their free will, and they also seem to surrender their morality. Um, and it does appear that those who have a hunger for power, who want to be president, who want to be prime minister or premier, are not always, the nicest people. They are people who want power, and power in itself is not necessarily such a benevolent thing. What you were just mentioning about drone strikes, bombing people, these are all really horrific events. My core concern about the biological weapons issue is that it does appear, from my research and the research of others, that there is, in the planning stage at least, an effort for deployment in a way that is simply going to change the face of the globe. There's a lot of buzz about depopulation, too many people on the earth, climate change, all this stuff that's keyed to overpopulation, or so the pundits tell us. And if there were to be some solution for the quote unquote population problem that involved wiping out a lot of people, how better to do it than a quote unquote naturally occurring pandemic that wasn't naturally occurring at all? And
Were
this
any of
is,
them ever?
sorry, what was that?
Were any of the modern pandemics ever naturally occurring? After if you look at the graphs, and this is a relevant point. We have a web page on drrematruthreports.com, which you can search by looking by searching Vax Stats Lie, and it's a series of graphs that show that the pro-vax people's statistics lie, and that in fact the great pandemic diseases were not wiped out by vaccines. They were wiped out by hygiene, sanitation, and better nutrition, and it happened decades before vaccination. The point to be made here is that 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 we how can I say this in a clear way? Um,
The point to be
yes,
made is that uh, there are solutions that enhance easily, quickly, and inexpensively enhance well-being, longevity, and population support. And those are avoided assiduously by those who would use instead methods that damage the genome, damage the population, and serve other agendas. Now, I happen to be convinced that depopulation is a part of the official agenda and that it is sought as a solution
to a number of pesky problems. A head of state told me that in 2002 that it was almost time for the great culling to begin, the culling of the useless eaters, the culling of 90% of the useless eaters. And that was because these people are, and I quote, consuming our non-renewable resources. Now, in fact, there are no non-renewable resources to be of any major proportion with modern technology, but the ethos is there, and the things that support populations and enhance their lives and strength and capacity, like sanitation, like better food, like education and hygiene, those things are distorted or they are avoided. And in the face of a very real agenda for depopulation, one doesn't even have to say why. It's quite clear why you would not want to enhance the well being of the majority of the world's people. It can be done easily, cheaply, and properly, and it's not being done. What's being done instead is to harm them, and the artificial plague model is very much part of that that control system. The artificial plagues frequently are introduced by weaponized food or by weaponized vaccines, because you make people sick, whether they're sick with the same thing or different things. You make them sick, you've created an artificial plague, whether it has one name or many.
Indeed. And the example I wanted to give, of course, was the 1918 flu pandemic, which was the one at the beginning of the vaccine era. And we haven't had anything that serious since then, and really hadn't had anything that serious in the decades before that, because those diseases had been conquered, as I said, by sanitation and by nutrition and hygiene. What happened with the 1918 flu pandemic was that it was a government vaccine test, in which everything that could go wrong went wrong, or maybe went right. I think, Dr. Rima, you've told that story before as well.
Exactly. It was, I don't believe that things went wrong. I think they went right, righter than any subsequent man made plague, avian flu, swine flu, or the others. And this was one that they got right, which is probably why the genome was reconstructed and woven into the DNA of the avian flu so that it could be used again. But unfortunately for them, it didn't work a second time.
Well, there are some who believe that some of these recent what uh, pandemic hysterias, swine flu, avian flu, whatever, have have simply been test runs. I don't. I personally believe that it does appear that the technology has advanced to the point where if they really plan to launch something big, they can launch something big. My research, and I discuss this extensively in my book Exile, indicates that the release of this pandemic, that the one that I'm going to Geneva to try to, expose and to detour, um, is linked to certain events that are taking place now in the Middle East. Now, it was looking like 2013 was the target date for the release of the pandemic. And in fact, of U.S. insiders, people in the know, were actually going on CNN and other venues stating, yes, we expect a pandemic by 2013. They were very.
I think we're still on. Dr. Rima, we may have lost you. Janet, are you still with us? Dr. Rima, are you still with us? All right, folks. Hang on, and we will get them back on. There we go. Hold on, we try to get the call back. I'm going to do a hang up and call back. Let's see. It's ringing on both of them, so I must confess it may be here at my end. Let's see what's going on. We were, of course, right in the middle of some very interesting things. Isn't that always the case when these things come off? Well, we have a half an hour left, and we're going to get them back. Are you back on, Dr. Rima? Janet?
One time so far. My
Yep,
apologies.
that's no problem. But it's
Okay,
Janet back. There
I
you go.
bounced off too. I was in the middle.
Yeah,
Can I go
please
on
keep
from
on
where I
going.
was?
Oh, yes, please.
Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm not sure where I got knocked off, but I was saying that a number of insiders, including former Senators Talent and Graham, who then at that point were working for the Weapons of Mass Destruction Center in Washington, D.C., were making public statements. This was like maybe about 10 years ago. We expect the pandemic by 2013. And that's shocking because how can you expect a pandemic if a pandemic is a naturally occurring uh, uh, microbial event? How can you expect it? Well, it appeared that certain things were happening in 2013, which I believe would have resulted with the launch.
Here we go again, getting knocked off. Are you back on, folks? Are you back
Unmute
on?
so I wouldn't give you the noise of the
Yeah, I think we lost
annoyance.
Janet again.
Okay,
Janet.
so right, so in I believe that the release of the pandemic is tied to certain events happening in the Middle East.
It is obvious, folks, that Janet is trying to tell us something of extreme importance. And, it's odd that we're getting a problem on Skype. We are actually using a cable connection, which is very fast, and there should not be any drop
Okay,
offs.
anyway, in this article, I discuss how important this engagement in Syria is to the American government, the NATO allies, and so forth, and how this invasion of Syria and the engagement.
Again, we seem to be interfered with. We're back on. I think we're back on. Janet, are you with us? Obviously, you're trying to tell us something really important, and we're being interfered with in some way. Um, this is a cable connection, and it should not. There should be no interference. Hold on while we try to get the call back. There is interference going on. Well, I'm going to hang up on both of our guest and Dr. Rima and then call them. There we go. We're back on again. Janet, you are trying to say something really important, and we're getting interfered with.
How are we being interfered with, Ralph?
We've got a high speed cable connection that we're connected to. There should be nothing that's stopping us from getting through. Yet I'm getting a signal about Skype needing to reconnect to both of you, even though you're many thousands of miles apart and connected to me in different ways. So I find that suspicious. But
Well,
Janet,
I'm getting
please
the same
continue.
message. I'm getting the same message, Ralph.
All right.
Interestingly, I am not.
Are you on?
But
You
then
are on
again,
Skype.
but then again, I'm not on Skype.
Oh, you're
I'm
not.
on, oh, wait a minute. Yes, I am. I'm on Skype. I
Okay.
am on Skype, but I'm on Skype on my cell phone and I'm not getting that message. I don't know if there's a difference.
Well, the information I'm really trying to get out here is that I think that the release of the pandemic may be imminent because we are, as I can see it, 2 steps away on the global chessboard from release. And if people are not following quite the connection here due to the repeated interruptions, I urge you to look for As Goes Syria, So Goes the World, because it is discussed in that article, which you can find online, free to read.
Let me tell you what I do to make sure that I am not exposed to pandemic disease or any other disease. And after all, I'm in a hospital which is rife with C. diff and resistant organisms and so on. And I have no fear of these organisms. And that is that I make sure that I take nanosilver 10 parts per million every single day. I take it prophylactically, and I make sure that my body has an immune system boost that is like a Gardol shield. Nothing is going to penetrate it. And that is one of the reasons that its power and its non-toxic characteristics, one of the reasons that we make it available as a health tool for putting your health in your hands. Even if vaccines worked, which they don't, you wouldn't need them if you were properly supported in terms of your immune system. And the best support that I know is nano silver. It's available at NSF Marketplace. It's a remarkable health product. I am surrounded by lethal organisms, and I have no concern because of the nano silver that I have with me and that I take. Just having it with you won't do it. But most of the world doesn't have nano silver. I urge you to get it if you are taking what Janet is saying very seriously. nsfmarketplace.com. But most of the world will not be protected. And what do you know about the nature of the organism or organisms that you suspect, Janet? And what do you know about the any other factors of this imminent or apparently imminent release of a world plague?
I know absolutely nothing about the agent except that it's probably not contagious. So it's probably not contagious. So if they're going with selective delivery systems, which would be either the vaccines or the water system as described in my article, Water as a Weapon, which has been the water systems having been substantially tweaked to provide a selective delivery system. If they're going with either of those, they're probably not going to use an agent that is contagious because they want to hit the targets and leave the non-targets alone. If they're going with selectivity of agent, which would mean a gene weapon, then this is technology that is far beyond the grasp of most of us mere mortals. So all that I personally know how to do is to lay out the research. We have the delivery systems in place. We have the changes in the legislation. We have the U.S. massively violating the BWC and nobody wants to do anything about it. We have the U.S. lying to the BWC. We have reports from insiders to expect the pandemic imminently. And then we have the U.S.'s engagement in the Middle East in the manners in which are discussed in that book, in the article, As Goes Syria, So Goes the World. So I believe that one can make a compelling case for intent to deploy.
Let's talk. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So all I personally know how to do is to take this evidence, to bring it to the UN, and not that I trust the UN one whit, but to then get the press coverage, which I have arranged to get for my presentation. And that's all I know how to do.
Um, would you talk a little about your work, your investigation of Dr. Death in South Africa and his funding and projects?
Well, see, this is a very interesting case study because this is where it does appear that a selectively targeted gene weapon has indeed been created and deployed. And yes, I'm so glad you brought that up, Dr. Rima. Dr. Death, that would be Dr. Vuder Bassan, was a a medical doctor who was in charge of Project Coast, which was the apartheid South Africa's chemical and biological weapons program. And Dr. Vuder Prasad, among multiple other criminal activities, was known to be developing a blacks only bioweapon. That would be a bioweapon that would only affect people of color. And his work on this is fairly shrouded in mystery. He doesn't want to talk about it. People who knew him don't want to talk about it. But based on information that I have received from a number of sources, Dr. Vuda Basson, was actually successful in creating a blacks only bioweapon. And what he did was he found something in terms of a biochemical substance that attaches onto the melanin. So people with darker skins have more melanin. And my initial tip off said that the reason that people of color, uh, African Americans, Mexicans, indigenous people, have a higher rate of the silent killers of diabetes and hypertension is because Dr. Busan completed his research. He basically developed the blacks only bioweapon in the early 80s, and he used his contacts at Portondown in Great Britain and also Langley, and got this basically leaked into processed food. Now, if you look at the rates of diabetes and hypertension, they suddenly start to spike in the 80s. And they spike specifically among darker skinned populations, and even more specifically among darker skinned populations that are eating processed food, living in cities.
I
So,
have some problems with this, Janet. Let me tell you why.
sure.
When I was a medical student, I began medical school in 1966. And when I was a medical student in Detroit, I decided that I needed to do something in addition to the studying I was doing, and I needed to make some sort of humanitarian impact in the city in which I was living. And I started working with a group of Black people who asked for help. I said we would supply the equipment and the doctors, and they needed to set their priorities for the clinic that we would set up, the free clinic. And they said, and I quote, "We die of the sugar, which is what they call diabetes, and of heart disease more than you do, more than you white folks do. And we want to know how to change that." And I was a first year medical student. What did I know? And I started looking at the statistics, and I saw that there was no question that the rates of cardiac disease and the rates of diabetes were significantly higher in the Black community. It wasn't yet the African American community. It was at that time the Black community, and same people. And when I started finding out about that, I discovered that that had been true for quite some time. And processed food was, yes, there was processed food, but it wasn't the destroyed, degraded, ubiquitous disaster that it is at this point that it became in the 80s. This was in 1966, 1967. So it's hard for me to fully credit that it only was because of Dr. Basant's hideous work.
So I'm
Now,
sorry, just to make sure I understand, you're saying that this is kidney failure. This is diabetes and kidney
No,
failure.
no, diabetes and heart disease. Of
Okay.
course, kidney failure often goes along with the chronic diabetes and the circulatory problems, but the main issues were diabetes and cardiovascular disease. And they understood that, and they wanted to change that. Now, it may be that there was an addition to the problem, but the problem has existed for a significant period of time. It has to do with the general diet distortions and the cultural factors as well as the genetic factors. Maybe Dr. Basant got the bright idea that you could make it worse in some way, but it was not an equal playing field in terms of disease incidence before widely spread contaminated, weaponized, processed food.
Okay, well, the problem I have with that, Dr. Rima, is when I did the research, on Dr. Bassan, I looked at a number of the different organizations that have been gathering figures on the incidence of diabetes and hypertension on, all sorts of groups, people of color, white people, whatever. And the rates clearly started to spike in the 80s. So, you know, anecdotal information is always very useful, but the evidence that has been put forth by the different foundations looking at this have really shown that spike happening in the 80s and then onward from there.
Well, it may be that it was a known tendency, a genetically based and culturally enhanced tendency that was worked upon or enhanced by these evil people. That's entirely possible. Hey, these people have more diabetes and more heart disease. Let's make it worse. Let's use that tendency. Could be.
Folks, we have about 14 minutes left on the Dr. Rima Truth Reports, reminding you again that you can always catch the live broadcasts on our YouTube channel, which you can get to from our healthfreedomportal.org. And of course, it's all archived on the same place. You'll be able to go back and see dozens and dozens of really extraordinary Dr. Rima Truth Reports. Well,
I don't know if we have told people that our principal website, since I didn't come on at the beginning of the show the way I usually do because of technical issues, um, our principal website is drrimatruthreports.com. That's DRRIMA truthreports.com. And when you go there, you have the opportunity to put your name and your first name and your email in. And that's a really good thing to do, because when you do that, you will find that you are receiving our newsletters, and they are chock full of information that you cannot get anywhere else, or that you get first from us, and action items, things that you can do about the things that are happening, like the CDC action item. If we do not flood the CDC with our protest, no, no, and no, you may not take control of our body. No, you may not force vaccination, chemotherapy, or other treatment, or withhold treatment from our bodies. No, no, and no, you may not abduct anyone in the United States and hold them indefinitely. And no, no, and no, you may not cancel arbitrarily, illegally, unconstitutionally the right of informed consent. No, no, and no. If you do not take that action, and if you do not share it with your friends and neighbors to take this action, then they will take this action, and they will own our bodies. Own our bodies. I invite you to go to drrimatruthreports.com and take that action, or to go to tinyurl.com/informed consent protection. This is beyond urgent. This is a fight to the death, but it's our death if we do nothing.
absolutely. And you'll see if you go to the front page of drremustruthreports.com that we have a countdown timer there reminding everyone of the number of days left before the CDC can do what it wants. They are legally obligated to respond to the comments that are filed before the deadline. And because we filed comments, we are in a position to sue if we can when the time comes. We're going to need your support to do that, and we're going to need bringing this thing viral. The way to stop it is to do what we did in the past. We proved over and over again in the past decade that pushback works. It started in 2007 when the FDA tried to sneak through its infamous CAM guidance, uh, filing it at the last minute, not bothering to issue press releases that it was filed, waiting 2 months before putting it in the Federal Register so nobody would find it until it was almost too late to file comments. And yet we flooded the FDA system with 500,000 comments. System crashed. FDA never finalized its CAM guidance. And then in 2009 and 2010, we got involved, of course, very much in the swine flu pandemic, and 3.5 million people sent messages to their representatives about refusing the swine flu vaccine. And of course, as you know, the vaccine was barely used by anyone, even though the government spent $6 billion to buy 150 million doses, hardly any of which were ever used. And there was no pandemic because there was no vaccination uh, to spread the disease. In 2010 and 2011, 5 million people sent messages to Congress and protected our dietary supplements when Congress adopted the FDA's so-called food safety law. And it went on from there. Dr. Rima in Chile in 2013, 1.5 million people, was it, stopped the Monsanto law, Le Monsanto, the law that would have given companies like Monsanto control over all the seeds in Chile. A great victory. Well, now we have to do it again in order to stop the CDC and its effort to abolish our right of informed consent.
Indeed, as Thomas Jefferson said, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. And we, yes, have to do it again. And we will have to do it again after that, and again, and again, and again. That is the nature of protecting your freedom. And Janet is in the process of protecting her freedom. Janet, I want
Oh
to
no,
know
Dr.
how
Rima, I want to make it really clear. I'm trying to protect the
your life.
lives of untold millions of people who will be affected by this released pandemic. That's what I'm trying to do here.
Indeed, indeed. And you're trying to protect your life as well. Um, what can we do to help you?
Well, I really appreciate the airtime, Dr. Rima and Ralph, getting, this issue discussed. I think it's pivotal that people pay attention to the sorts of the backroom machinations that are going on about this biological weapons stuff. So, it appears to be fairly imminent. And actually, I don't know if we have the time here, but you probably don't. While we were on the air, I just got an email from another reporter who's in Eastern Europe concerning his work on the Lugar lab in the Republic of Georgia, and what his investigations have come up with. This lab that has been run by the United States in Tbilisi, Georgia, and this gentleman, Jeffrey Silverman, for his good work, had his citizenship revoked by the United States. Jeffrey Silverman was born in the
Wow.
United States. So we have, full scale problems, lawfare, some people call it, legalized, weaponized warfare going on against people in all sorts of different ways. Anyway, I think we are just about out of time. I just really wanted to mention, this other case of this other journalist and what's happened to him. This journalist who's also trying to expose the biological weapons agenda of the United States.
Wow. And we would love to have him on our show.
Excellent. I'll let him know.
Please.
Please.
You are speaking out for truth. You are speaking out for humanity. And I salute you. Anytime, in any way that we can help you, Janet, please let us know.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your having me on, both of you.
Absolutely.
Thank you and God
Um,
bless.
Thank you. Thank you. Janet is, well, actually, we have about 6 minutes according to my timekeeper here. Ralph, do we have a few more
Yes.
minutes?
Oh, yeah, we have 6.
Why is,
We
hello?
have 6 more minutes. Yes.
Why are these shows important? First of all, they are things that we are covering topics that affect your life directly that you're never going to hear about, not only on the mainstream media, but on most of the independent media, because the independent media has developed its own agenda. Uh, our agenda is to bring you the truth and to support your freedom, to give you the tools that you need to make your own decisions, to bring you the health products that you need, to bring you the health information and the political information in a wide ranging array of topics from a wide ranging and diverse set of speakers and investigators and research. Janet Fallon is a good example. She's a poet, she's a journalist, she's an author, she's an investigator, and she is a thorn in the side of the great ones. We're thorns in the sides of the great ones too. And you need to be a thorn. You see, I believe it is the responsibility of free men and women to be thorns. If you're not a thorn in somebody's side, you're not doing anything. If you're not a thorn in the side of the people who want to kill you for their own purposes, you're not doing anything. If you're not a thorn in the side of the people who want to destroy the economy and with it, your life, your substance, your ability to feed yourself and house and clothe and feed your family, then you're not taking your responsibility for occupying space on this planet seriously. And that means you need to be taking the actions that are easily available to you. Our action items can be taken with your freedom mouse. You don't have to discommode yourself in any way to take action effectively. Now, it is true if one person or seven people or 26 people take an action, it is not effective. But if 26,000 or 260,000 or 2.6 million say to the decision makers, and remember, one of our action items might go to 30 different decision makers. And so 1,000 people taking the action would result in 30,000 emails being sent. 10,000 would result in 300,000 emails being sent because each one has multiple targets. You take the action, you click the freedom mouse, you send the emails, and you are saying, I am in charge of my life, and don't you dare attempt to control, corral, or kill me. That's pretty important stuff. And most people sort of slide by not focusing on that. But if you don't focus on that, the consequences are, as we heard in our discussion with Janet Fallon, the consequences can be far larger than you ever imagined, and they can be quite literally deadly. Ralph?
Indeed, Dr. Rima. Here in the last 2 minutes of this episode of the Dr. Rima Truth Reports, where we've explored a lot of things, we've looked at the way the medical system has been impacting Dr. Rima and General Burt. We looked at the way the legal system has been impacting Janet Phelan. We looked at a lot about the law of informed consent and the law of the weapons of mass destruction conventions and other issues. And what we've come to conclude is that we are all being targeted in so many different ways by so many different power systems that we have to keep our eyes on people like Janet, who are really, in many ways, the canaries in the coal mine. Uh, they are the people who are pushing the outer limits, just like Dr. Rima does. And the pushback they get from the system shows us the nature of what's going on and what we can all expect in the future. General Byrd is alive because Dr. Rima pushed back.
That's
If
exactly
not,
right.
if not, he would be just another 86-year-old man who died. Period. Go to the hospital and die.
Who, as they would say, didn't make it.
Right, right. But
It's
he
important
had
that
something that they didn't
uh,
have, and that was nutrition. and some magic help, you know, and intentionality, some very strong intentionality. Bert is not one to give up, let me tell you. And that's it, folks.
I'm
The
sorry,
end of
I
another
can't hear
episode.
you. I think I've lost you.
Oh.
I think I've lost you. Well, if you can hear me,
There it is, folks. It is the end of another Dr. Rima Truth Reports. Uh, Unexpectedly, with people dropping off the line, but hey, we're used to that sort of thing happening. We will see you again next Wednesday. Thank you.